Hey, Travis.
What's up, my friend? How are you?
All right, all right. Is there a way you could fix your screen as far as turn it the other way around?
Yeah, I guess I can.
Only
Oh,
because
no.
it's not allowing me with my phone to go in the direction that you're going, the landscape they call it
So
mode.
what you're telling me is that you're making it inconvenient for Mr. Wonderful Son to do this podcast. So you know what? We're just gonna do this. We'll get a quick shot of the robes. We'll knock that out real quick since we're live,
Okay.
right? I was gonna put one on, and I did for a second. And it's not that I don't feel like I'm worthy. I just feel like they're way too heavy, and I don't feel like sweating at the moment.
I got you. Oh man.
So we'll just do this from the comfort of my living room chair.
Okay, that works. That definitely works.
I,
Let
I
me
like the
just
outfit though. You look good.
thank you.
I, I, I feel like I should ask for some Planters peanuts.
Yeah.
Is that?
Oh, now you know. Listen, you got the fans now. Now they're gonna have a whole bunch of comments to say about me. It's like,
Yeah.
where's the nuts? Where's the nuts? Um, what you call it? Let me actually log on here. All right. So I'll tell you a brief history about this whole the hat situation. I was doing a podcast like myself and Ron Garvin. We do a podcast together, and he was he was asking me, he was telling me, you know what? You should actually, if you have a cowboy hat, you should start wearing a cowboy hat. So then I started laughing. I said, I don't have a cowboy hat, but I do have something close to it, a derby hat that I brought in 1996. I'm telling
Yeah.
him I
So
so
you're aware that a cowboy hat and a derby hat are not close to each other at all. Literally, totally different span of time and location.
okay. So what are we dealing with as far as when it came down to the derby hat? The derby hat was more in the what was it? I guess the
That was that
mobster.
aristocrat. I'm gonna go more in the 1920s zoot suit, kind of
Oh,
1930s. And I would, but you know what? I actually go more 1800s, and that would be British. Britain was a derby hat kind of place, as I understand it.
gotcha, gotcha.
It
Okay.
suits you, though. It suits you. Some people, the more of their face we cover, the better looking they get. Um, and the reality is, there is, as my father said, and there's a public health crisis out there. So every time I come on screen, another woman faints. So um, I have to be careful how much I show. So I couldn't wear that outfit because there would be too much skin. The CDC would have to get involved. It would be a scary thing. I got to be honest.
There you go. There you go. So okay, so let's start getting into it. I want to share something with the fans. When we was doing this documentary on you, well, first it actually, and I hate using the words. I don't know how you feel about this, but I hate using the word shoot interview because I think the word shoot interview has been brought down to such a low level. It gives you a feel of that slimy guy in a suit in a Hawaiian shirt. It's like that cheap car salesman who tries to pay you top dollars the best he can to get the dirtiest story that he can get out of you to try to actually defame or how can I say, bring somebody else's character down and stuff like that. And my thing is the word shoot itself originated from just shooting from the hip, just telling the
Right,
truth. So
right.
people associate the word shoot with you have to say something negative. And I'm like,
Well,
no. So I felt
I
like
think I think there's
mhm,
a couple things that actually come to mind when you say that, and here's what I'll tell you. I was having this conversation the other day. So words change meaning, and they're often even changed in the Webster dictionary. So for example, the word peruse has been bastardized. The word peruse is actually to go into detail, but we use it as to scan over quickly. The word meditate had a different meaning in 1913 versus in 1970 with the 60s revolution. So we changed the meaning of words very often. I was actually talking to somebody special earlier, and we were talking about the word occasionally. And so what the definition for occasionally means for me may be once a month. For you, it might mean, well, every couple of days. So uh, what a shoot interview does, I think it elicits the idea that we're going to use a gimmick. But to your point, the actual meaning was, let's just have a conversation. And I think whatever the definition is, I do steer away from a lot of wrestling verbiage intentionally, because what it means to me and what it means to you can be two different things. Kayfabe is a great example. What it meant in the 80s was you were going to continue the impression that wrestling was real, right? But as a child, it meant shut the hell up. Like, don't divulge anything. So I would be there. Somebody might ask a question about wrestling, and I would hear my dad go, kayfabe. And that meant shut up and get over next to me. Right. And so um, I think what matters most is that we put this on a platform and allow people to come up with their own impressions, whatever the definition is. I don't think our purpose behind this documentary was ever what it ended up being, but it ultimately ended up being exactly what it was supposed to be.
Right, right. I was mentioning to you normally, and we was even talking about in this, and just to let you know, I gave it a name called a Movientary, sort of like a movie slash documentary when both worlds meet together. And I feel like this is what we have as far as what we created, which you narrating, of course. But it started off. It was funny. It started off as just a regular documentary, as far as the son interviewing me interviewing a son of a legend, and I wanted to actually get to know more about you before we dived into your father itself, because I think I even told you in the recording that so many times when the family member of the legend gets interviewed, it's more like it just gives a feel of forget who the person I'm talking to. Okay, yeah, 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 you're the son, whatever. Tell me more about your dad. And look, let's be honest. Yes, the reason why that child is there in front of that camera, the family member, is because to actually talk about their family, whoever, whether it was he or she, whoever that legend was, or is. And the thing is, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And before we got to the actual subject, which was your father, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndoff, I wanted to actually find out more about his son, the man himself. And then that's why we separated it into part one and part two. Now, part one has two chapters. Chapter one, which is Travis Orndoff, and then chapter two, which leads into your father, the legend himself, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndoff. Um, and I found that very important. So when we first started talking, I don't know if you remember, like in the beginning we said something as we started dealing with spirituality and stuff like that, and then that's when it started taking a whole different angle, and we just started talking for like a good half an hour, 40 minutes, and we didn't even do an introduction. We just went straight to it, and then we looked at each other, and then it had to feel like, dude, it just feels like there's no need, let's just keep it going, let's just, you know what I'm saying, it just gave me that feel. um and then from that point, I told you like one of my issues as far as when I do the interview. Like I think I asked you, do you rather me have the camera off when we're doing the interview and just keep the focus on the subject itself? Because I felt like I had no value to the whole situation. So with
And
that being
if you recall, my feedback was, this is an interaction. This is a human interaction. And so um, we create and speak so much with our tone, with our eye contact, with our body language. It's the reason so many arguments happen through text, because if somebody is sensitive, then they're immediately offended by a text message that other person had no meaning behind, but it was how it was perceived, which is really more of a direct reflection of that individual. I think what's very unique about me, and I say unique, not that I'm better or have more history or experience. than other kids of wrestlers. But what I'll tell you from my own experience was that many of them, and they're wonderful human beings, their dad passed, in their 40s or in their like, very young. And so, several of the kids of wrestlers that I know, like they got 9 years with their dad. I got 43 years. And so I was very fortunate to have a father that uh, was around, that the stories of his life and of his wrestling shaped me. But they shaped me differently than they shaped my brother, because he's 9 years older and he experienced WrestleMania in his teens, and I was, single digits. So I think the evolution of our conversation was contingent upon the history I have with my father, and listen, I can't say this for anybody else, but I know of a couple of kids, like I was in the dressing room from the time I was like 5 years old. And so I had that experience. Now, that was unique to me. There were kids that did that, but that wasn't the norm. Most of these men they partied a lot, so they didn't bring their kids on the road because it would interfere with their lifestyle, right? And we've seen that through other stories that have been shared, and the relationships that do or don't exist with other wrestlers' kids. So my story is unique to me simply because of the time of life I had with him, how he shaped my life, not only as a child, but even post. A post wrestling career. I saw the deterioration because he actually aged. We saw the effects of CTE. So I think the way this evolved was very natural. One, we connected on our faith, and for me, everything I do and have done for years, although it has gotten more narrowly focused, has always been around how do I tell this story about my dad in a way that really reflects the impact he had on me personally, the stories I got to hear from him later in life, and then how it shaped my faith even after his death, because he was with me when he passed at 43 years old. I was. And so, yeah, I think it was, you can't always plan for magic. Sometimes it just happens. And I think this was a great example of two people that could connect on multiple levels. I'm never going to be able to tell my story or my dad's story without being able to reflect on things that happened and how it affected me, and ultimately has affected my purpose, my identity, my faith, and then how I live life today, simply because of the impact I saw him have prior to really being involved in any social media, and then being able to get this perspective from fans after he passed. And I didn't say this in the podcast, but I was thinking it, that um, the his passing allowed me to identify all the sacrifices as a child when he wasn't around. Right, he wasn't at a baseball game, he wasn't at my football game, or he wasn't at an award ceremony. Like, those things hurt for a long time, and I felt like I missed out on them. But later in life, to hear these stories at the age of 43, 44, as I am just grieving and mourning his passing, um, I'm starting to hear the stories of things he did when he was gone. And all of a sudden, all those sacrifices, all those like internal resentments I didn't even know I had, came to the surface, and they were resolved because I knew my father. It's like I said, I wanted you to see him as my father, but I actually got to see him as Mr. Wonderful. And I had never connected with that side. That was just a title. But hearing the stories from fans of how he impacted them on a very personal level, as a fan, sitting with him, having stories like that, reshaped my entire life and changed it permanently, and for the good, and for the good.
Did you when it came down to you meeting the fans, did you ever have an opportunity? As far as I know, a lot of times the question is about your father, but do they ever sit down and do you get a chance to tell more about yourself on who you were as far as the son? of the
Um,
legend?
so what, the truth is, um, because of, and it's funny, I used to somewhat, judge my dad because Mr. Wonderful would come out, right? And I mentioned that in the those interactions we had where it was like, yo, you're just dad right now, let that go. And it was kind of a funny thing, watching it happen. I had created two identities. One of them was Mr. Wonderful's son, and that person was different than Travis. Right. And so I had a friend tell me one time, he's like, dude, when you get in an environment, you turn into this other personality. But I didn't find that out till I was like in my late 30s. And I'm like, I do what? I'm like, oh my Lord, I'm doing exactly what I said my dad did. So those stories, prior to his passing, I wasn't connected to that identity until I had to accept that it was no longer part of my identity, right?
Mhm.
His passing it's that, I always said, people say, Mr. Orndoff, I'm like, I'm Travis. But when my dad passed, now I am Mr. Orndorff, right? Like there's this changeover, this the realization that you're the elder statesman, if you will, and so those stories would have been insincere. They would have come from a place of just telling it as Mr. Wonderful's son.
Mhm.
Now that identity that I had connected to and found significance in, it dissipated, and that no longer exists, right? I now live and come from a place where I'm Travis, and I'm good with that. And that wasn't always the case. So I think his passing, the things that God did in my life, and even the gift of understanding that death is permanent, right? Like you don't realize how close you are until you lose something, and you just go, I can't get this back, and there's nothing I can do about it. But seeing the impact he had on other people, I started to realize I have my own legacy to live, and the ripple effects that I'm able to support because of the platform I have, because of that former identity. I approach it differently. I approach it with grace, humility, respect. But very often people are like, your dad would be proud of you, and I'm like, you're right. He always was. But the cool thing is, I'm proud of me, and I've become the man I think he always wanted me to become, and I'm becoming the man I think God intended me to be.
Right. Good. Good. Um, so now, when it comes down to this documentary, we said a lot. As well, this Movientary, there was a lot that was said. What are some of the stuff that you're hoping the fans who actually get a chance to see this? And as a matter of fact, is debuting January 3rd. Don't forget, debuting January 3rd. What are you hoping that the fans could walk away with as far as after seeing something like this?
So I think I want people to recognize that, the fire, the entrance, the music, like that was a very small percentage of his life. If
Mhm.
you look at it, 70 years, the time it took for him to get into wrestling, even if he wrestled every night for 30 minutes, if you add those 30 minutes up, that's a very insignificant amount of his life.
Mhm.
His life was very much more the relationships he had with himself and with other people, the way he changed over time, his coming to Christ as his Lord and Savior in his 30s. He was so much more than Mr. Wonderful. And I was having this conversation recently where somebody was said, man, your dad's Mr. Wonderful. You met this person, and this person. You're so cool. And while he's absolutely correct, I am cool. I sorry, I can't. I always want to try to say it with a straight face, but I still am. So what I would say is like that is such an end. Like that's not how my life looks. And I remember one time there was, just for an example, there was a moment in WrestleMania last year where Triple H brought up my father, and when he did, I was in a place of gratitude because it was just, I hadn't heard my dad's name in a long time. Ultimately, to, earlier this year on what would have been his 71st birthday, we entered into a Legends contract with the WWE once again, which had not been there for years. So at that moment, I didn't know down the road that we would be having it. I would be having a conversation with people at WWE. But in that moment, I was just grateful um, get a text message from somebody showing me that clip, and I posted it, right. And it's funny how things I post on different social media platforms, what gets likes and what gets views. And I really don't worry about that. I don't focus on it. I care more about the messages I get independently, or like, let me tell you what happened, or how your dad helped me, or what he did for me, or the advice he gave. Like that stuff is gold, right? But that small clip and me sending out this post on X got like 300,000 views, right? And so I'm going to visit a friend in Tennessee, and I'm just getting updates. They're like, you're not going to believe this. This is now at 50,000, 100,000, blah, 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 blah. And in that moment, you know what I was thinking was, number one, you got to see my heart, that I'm just in a place of gratitude. And how cool is it that gratitude got 300,000 views? Like that was special to me. That the message I'm sending out resonated with people, and it was real. It was from my heart. I didn't send that so we got a bunch of likes or views. I did it because that's how I felt deep in my heart. But to know that gratitude got to trend a little bit, that was something I was proud of. But the reality is, all these views are coming in. The phone is over on the charger. I'm taking a shower and just admiring my body in the mirror. So I can't even say it. So I could, if we were playing, if this wasn't a serious conversation. But I'd have my shirt off, but I don't want anybody to faint. Like in that moment when I'm going to visit a friend in Tennessee that's in need, right? Like all these things are going on, and I'm thinking to myself, y'all realize this didn't change anything about my day. I still took a shower. I still had breakfast. I still made sure I drank water. I still drove to visit a friend. Like those views they're like in the ether. They had no impact on my day. The only thing and the only impact was I was so grateful that gratitude for something somebody said was sent out to the world, and that the message of hope and faith and blessings and gratitude, like if that's the message that I send, not to, I have to try to avoid the word wonderful because everybody just assumes I'm making a pun, but and all joking aside, that's wonderful. Like that's my purpose. My purpose is not to glamorize wrestling. It's not to glamorize or bring attention to myself. It's not even really to bring attention to my father. It's meant to bring attention to my heavenly Father, who gave me an opportunity to live a life that went through a lot. I went through a lot of struggles. I struggled with addiction. I struggled with, at one point in time, I don't know if I shared this, but when I broke my arm and 10 years ago, they put me on 24 pain pills a day. I was on 12 10 milligram Percocet, 12 150 milligram tramadol, and 30 Gabapentin, all of which I found out later when I started having these issues were direct correlation to me coming off that medication. And I'm like, what happened to me? And they're like, well, you're struggling with this. I'm like, but I wasn't struggling with this a year ago, only to find out later on it was a direct, connection to this medication that I was coming off of. Now, granted, I didn't go out and do heroin. I didn't end up in the streets. I didn't end up a junkie. But man, the mental health struggles I went through after that were brutal. And for me to be on this side of all that pain, all that discomfort, all of those trials, and to be able to share a message and bless one person, brother, that's a good life. That's a good life.
Wow, unbelievable. So let me ask you something. When your dad used to come home from the road, did he come home more injured than healthy, or was it a balance? As far as you remember when he was younger.
So men like my father don't admit pain. They just, that's not their MO, right? Like he wrestled through. I remember one time he was telling me about he had done a bump into like the steel steps, which thinking back, that's like so ridiculous they had steel steps, right? But he hit his head on it and he's like, I don't remember the rest of that match. So when he got to an age, um, Well, let me tell you one story. So I really hurt my back in my 20s, right? And this is a precursor to me having a spinal fusion, different from the injury on my arm. But we were driving on the road, and I'm like, Dad, man, my back is so bad. I got to go in. Blah, blah, blah. He's like, do you want a pain pill? And I'm like, no, 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 no. He's like, no, they're not bad. They're not addictive. And this is obviously we found out later it's OxyContin, and they're highly addictive.
Oh,
But he's like, no, 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 I'll give you one. So I was like, are you sure? And I trusted him. And I took half of one. First of all, they were instant release. So I broke off that seal by breaking it in half. Man, that stuff hit me so hard. I was like crawling in the chair, like, Dad, slow the car down. He's like, I'm going 35. And it was like, it was the worst experience of my life. Like, it was so bad. But he avoided that pain medication because he was fully aware of the impact it had. He saw his friends die after using them, right?
mm,
And so I think it's important to note that while my father experienced a ton of pain, he worked his way through that mentally and emotionally, and so that stuff didn't come out until later in life, where I'd be sitting in the bedroom or in his room. He was watching those darn hunting shows, and everybody's whispering everything. It's so odd. And we're watching the show, and I would look over and go, Dad, like, are you hurting? And he would go, oh, Travis, I can't even explain it. And that would be the most you would get, genuinely, like that. And to me, that was oh my Lord, my dad is human, right? Like, it surprised me. But he never went into detail. That I'm the vocal one, right? Like, I talk too much. He generally was a man of few words. But he shared in those moments, like, oh, it's brutal. And when he would say that, and yet he still avoided the pain pills. And I don't know if there's a correlation between the both of us having it, but I'm allergic to it. So I won't, in spite of the pain I go through, I refuse to take them. I don't want anything to do with them. I will do everything I can. I lost weight. I got flexible. I do anything I can to avoid any type of medication. And I certainly don't take anything that's addictive. But he would rarely take them because they caused so much constipation. They would just tear his stomach up, and I had the same experience. And so when he took one, in my mind, I'm like, oh, he's dying. He's hurting. If he took a pain pill, I knew that was a 10. That meant he could barely breathe. He was in so much pain because I saw him catch his breath. And he wasn't a smoker, he was a dipper. But man, when he took one of those pills, and it was rare, few and far between. But man, that meant he was like, I can't take another moment.
oh. Your dad was very health conscious. We was talking. We briefly touched as far as during the interview. Um, is it safe to say if he was alive today, he would have been very innovative as far as in the fitness world, as far as creating workout regimens, a health plan and stuff like that? You know how you have trainers create like a dietary program and stuff like that because of the way you describe your father was, as far as very innovative and stuff, way
So,
before his
so
time.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It cut out my ear, but no, I don't think that would have been him. And the reason I say that, I'm the detail oriented one. Like, he would, when we were, during his towards the end years, he wanted me to do what I'm doing now, right? But at the time, I had kids in high school and I was raising children. I had a full time job. Like, doing this social media content takes a lot of energy, emotionally, physically. I try to be thoughtful about the message we send out. I wasn't mentally or emotionally ready to do that during that time. I was going through my own physical issues and trying to make life work. So, what I would say is Dad was so intuitive. Creating that model, he could do it, and it was very instinctual to him. But going out and being the innovative person, he would have needed probably me, because now, like, I can do some of those things, but at the time it wasn't really, I wasn't there. So I think if he had gone and been alive today and wrestled, or like, I could see him more as a possibly doing like UFC fighting. I could see him leaning towards something like that. Um, if it was just wrestling, I think he would needed somebody that could have been a brand partner. Like, with my dad's personality, his temper, his fuse, and even his, insecurities. Like I remember one time this was like in his late 40s, he was working with a dialect coach about possibly doing like some acting. Like he could wrestle, he could cut promos, but that emotional connection to some of those things, like the Jesse Venturas of the world are that came from wrestling and did some of the movies and like it's a we saw Hulk Hogan try to do movies. It was not good, right? Like they're good at what they were good at, and we should glorify and recognize that because not everybody can do what they do. But that transition, like The Rock plays the same character in every movie. Like I don't hold that against him at all. But his branding, his model, like he's very much a unique person. He has a skill set intellectually. But he was raised a little bit different in a different environment. You throw in all those things, like my dad's not that innovator. He is a go getter. He's the guy that goes 100 miles per hour and would have given everything to wrestling and disregarded anything else. Everything that I talk about my dad's routines, his diet, he never said, "Here, eat this." I saw it, like I witnessed it, and I was fortunate to have a memory that where I just kind of it imprinted on me, um, so much so that it translated to the rest of my life. But I would say of all the other people in my house, my mom never ate healthy. My brother wasn't around. I don't think that imprinted on other people. And I'll even say it this way. When I was a kid, I mentioned this story, like when he would come in on the weekends or, on a Friday or whatever, like I would go to the gym with him. And that started when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And I did that until I was 20 years old. Like I was working out with him when I was 24. So I saw the evolution of his routines change and, uh, uh, and being able to witness that and that change and evolution of him, like the way he worked out in his 50s. What I'll tell you is, of all the times I saw him work out, when he came back from his neck surgery in '96, and I remember '96 because he was wearing a brace at my graduation. Um, that period of time, it probably looked similar to what he was like when he was 18, 19. But brother, he had veins running through his abs. His body looked like a freaking roadmap. And he was doing. I remember going to the gym with. I'm 24, and I got in it. Like I was, 6 months in. I was keeping up with. We would do like, the ab straps and knee ups, and then do them to each side. He'd do like 300 in a row, a total of 900. And I'm not kidding. He would not stop. Like I would do 100, and get up to 300. Man, I felt like I was going to die. Right? Like and he could keep going. Like I would get to the third set and I'm like, that's it. I'm retiring. I'm out. Like I tapped. And he would keep going. And then he would go and do that the next day at the power plant. So that specific time period, I got to see all these different versions where he kind of focused more on his cardio, but his diet was very simple. And I'll end with this, that back in the '80s, it was much easier to eat healthy. We had different ingredients, but he always stuck to a high protein, no sugar, not necessarily low carb, but we avoided white anything, right? White rice, white flour, white bread. Like white was not good in my house, right? And, you know, what I think translates, and this is where I just kind of modified it to what made sense to me, is he ate everything that was real. I don't remember if I said this in the podcast, but I heard somebody else say it. It made me laugh, and it stuck with me. If there's a health food section in your grocery store, what does that make the rest of the grocery store, right?
Well, something to
Uh,
think about. Yeah.
so I remember Michael Pollan. I read a book about this years ago. So I spent time kind of diving into the science of this, and it all supported everything my dad said, and then some, which was, avoid overeating red meat, depending on your individual needs. Eating low fat, right? Like, but not no fat, like. just avoiding fatty things like fried chicken. That's a fatty, oily substance, right? So,
Right.
so where I would say I disagree is there are some healthy fats out there, but he always said he got those from seeds. He never got those from butter. So it wasn't that fat was bad. It was that he avoided really what he thought was processed. I don't remember any time in my life we had margarine in the house or like we had real food. And the way it was described, I say it this way: if God made it and it was intended to be eaten, you can eat it. If God didn't make it, you probably should avoid it based on the fact that we have 10,000 food additives. But he stuck with a very simple routine, and like he was against salt. I actually am a believer that salt is better for you than you think, and you need that because those are electrolytes, right? And that's based on your own dietary conditions. And but most people get their salt in different ways, which is the food additive side. So it's high sodium. So his diet would have been modified slightly based on the science. And but I remember one time, I've come to believe that fasting is healthy. Like even if it's just learning, one of the main things I learned from fasting was I had the ability to say no to an impulse,
Mhm.
and that not only that I could say no, but that impulse would be short lived. Dad never went a day with fasting. Like I just, he thought that was insane. And I remember I, did it a couple of times, and I didn't see the benefit because there was other things in my life I didn't add to it, which is like a sleep routine, no alcohol, a consistent diet, mentally healthy, good relationships. Like there's all these things added. You can eat right all day long, but if you're angry and you're, like that's going to affect you. And who cares if you look great if you're in a bad mood all the time, right? Um, to answer, just so I get a chance, yes, my dad was buddies with Bob Orton and Roddy Piper. To your point, they did spend a little more time in extracurricular activities. Dad did participate. He told me a story about Studio 54, isn't that the name of it?
Mhm.
From New York Studio, what was it called? The club that everybody went to in the 80s.
I think it was Studio 54, I believe.
Yeah, do not kid yourself. My dad did participate in some of those activities, but it was not in his normal everyday routine. He was in the gym, like he was addicted to the gym. He like that dude. I mean, like I wear a ring that tells me what my sleep patterns are. Like I didn't happen right then. Like he was religious about his sleep.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. His your dad's intensity. Is it safe to say it transferred over into other areas in his life that he got involved in, whether it be football. You mentioned he did rowing. Everything that he started getting involved in, did that same intensity transfer over?
Yes, and I can only speak to it because that appears to have been an inherited trait
Mm.
that I received. I didn't get his hair, I didn't get his body, but I inherited this motor that when even when I go back and watch some of my podcasts, I'm like, wow, I really talk fast. Like seeing it is way different because in my mind, I'm like, I can't talk fast enough to get the thoughts out. I have to verbally process a lot of things because it's like I got so many ideas going on. Thank you, neurodivergence. But dad had one speed, right? And that was, and I remember, and I don't prefer to use profanity, but I'm just going to say what he said. The rule in our house is you don't do anything half-assed. Like that was a principle that we did. Like, and so if you were going to be a hunter, you were going to be the best hunter. If if you're going to play baseball, you're going to commit to that team. You are not quitting. You're going to all year long. That is what you're going to do. We were not taught to quit. We were not allowed to quit. And I think that we just have an energy level that is people often will be around me. They're like, "Wow, you've got a motor," and I'm like, "Man, if I could give some of it away, I would." I don't know how else to do things, right? That's what I was. That was embedded in my soul. When you're going to do something and you commit to something, you go all in. And there was periods of my life where because of um, my own issues physically or even my mental health, at times. that I failed to follow through on those different commitments, right? Like I failed as a man, as my dad did. But what I can say is, when it comes, like people will meet me and they're like, "Were you in the military?" And I'm like, "Why would you say that? Like, do I look like military?" And they're like, "Kinda, but you're really disciplined." And I'm like, "Isn't everybody like you?" In fact, I just did something the other day. I was with uh, somebody I consider very special. And we were at the grocery store, and I put all the groceries up on the cart, and I had organized them by product, and they were stacked, and they were like the label was facing the same way. Which, if you tell me I do that, I'm like, yep, and I'm still gonna do it. Like I can't stop. Right? Like even when I put my groceries on the cart, I kind of do it intense and disciplined, or almost structured, and um, and so that was very much just that was just the way we lived. And I want to answer another question. My dad did hunt with Rick Rude and Kurt Henning. Henning was in Minnesota. Rick used to come over to the house, and him and Dad would go hunting together. Dad was very close. When Rick passed, it was something that I saw my dad cry. It brought him to tears. He could think about Rick passing, and it would upset him. And I don't remember my dad crying many times. That Rick's passing, when my grandfather, his father-in-law passed, those were moments that my dad. I remember he used to just like kind of like bang his hand with. He'd have a handkerchief and he'd just kind of slap his leg. It's kind of this movement he made, and it was his way of just saying like this is breaking my heart. Um and uh, i'm gonna answer one more question. It says, what was my take on the gym videos and the salon videos he did? So one of the things I'll tell you is when my dad did his Hall of Fame speech, I was there. I'm in the second row behind Hogan's wife. I'm next to the Sheik's wife. And so I remember flying out there, and we're in the plane and we're going around, we're having a couple drinks at the bars, and he's introducing me to different people at WWE, and they're all kind of like, "Man, why didn't you go into wrestling?" Or like, "Why don't you write some of the creative content?" And my dad's like, "Nope," like that was shut down quick. And so we were on the bus, like it was right before, but we got to the facility, and Dad's bringing me back because I had to sign a waiver, and they were filming Hogan's like VH1 TV show. I don't remember what it was. Hogan Knows Best, or they were doing some clips, but he wanted me to see. Roddy wanted to see me. I wanted to see Roddy. Like they remember when I was a kid, right? And they just couldn't believe, obviously that I was so handsome and so good looking that I never lost that. They were impressed, and they should have been. So see, I can't. I still laugh. You're laughing. I laugh. So, but no, he came up and gave me a big kiss on the cheek and hugged me, and you know, I said, "Dad, are you going to? Do you want me to because I'm a structured person. I write like I put things on paper, right? I wrote a gratitude list today of the 10 things I was grateful for. It's kind of my routine every day, and so I said, Dad, you want me to take any notes or anything for your Hall of Fame speech? And he's like, No, I got it. And he walked up and he did that completely ad lib, 100%, like off the top of his head. And that improvisation, I firmly believe, having watched his videos back at Georgia National Championship Wrestling, things like that was a skill he developed, and he always gave Roddy credit for that. He always said Roddy taught him how to handle some of and I think Roddy gave him ideas because Roddy probably is a little more like me, that he just always talking. But was very, very creative, right? If you look at Roddy's body, like his facial expressions made his matches just as much as the moves. And I think he's undervalued as a wrestler because he. All of his matches that were good looked like brawls. They were completely out of control. They had no idea what was going on. So when those videos came out, going back to these videos, like Dad did that off the top. There were no script writers. Sometimes people will see Dad and Bobby talking, and Bobby will be mouthing the words that my dad says during the interview, right? Like, one of the times my dad fired him, and he's like, "I'm sick and I'm tired, I'm sick and and Bobby's mouthing it, and I'm like, they're like, "Oh, he's mouthing the script," and I'm like, "No, he's not. That is a actual condition where people do that. They typically stop doing it when they're young." And I had a young man that I grew up with named Matt Brown. He did it as a kid. He used to drive me crazy, but he would be mouthing your words as you were saying them, and it was just, I can't remember the. It starts with, it's a word that starts with letter A, but I can't remember what it is. But um, all of those things were not scripted. They would go into a room before a match, and they go like, this is the one thing you heard over, boom boom boom, and then this, and then boom boom boom, and then this. Like half of every part of their wrestling match script was just boom boom boom. Like, and so they would come up with an idea, and then they played it out in real time because they were navigating towards how do we have the fans participate. So I'm watching first of all, I remember the first time YouTube started showing those promos of dad in the gym and calling that lady, he's like, most fat women don't have their own teeth. And I'm like, oh, for the love of God, please don't let any employer ever see that and associate it with me. And I have to explain this at work because I have a peer that watched it or whatever, right? Like that, those early days, I'm like, oh God, this is going to wreck my world. But I remember watching that video with my dad, and I was never at peace with it, right? Like I was like, man, that's just a little too far. Now, granted, it's the '80s. Things that you know, things that got said back then, you wouldn't say today, and we've become more conscious. But at the same time, and I say this with all due respect, like if you look back to 1980, 1982, like 17% of the country was overweight to BMI. Like now it's like 78%. So that at that time it was a completely different um, um, idea that people would eat, but food was different back then. It certainly wasn't until the '80s that the tobacco companies started buying the food companies and creating basically addictive food, and using all these ingredients that even people that speak Latin can't translate. Um, so I remember sitting there with my dad, and it was I think this was 2014, and we were watching the promo of him with the woman, and he actually got teary eyed, and he did that thing that I was telling you with the handkerchief, like, oh. And then he looks at me and he goes, Travis, I promise you, before I said any of that, I went to her and she looked at me as I was hesitant, and she said, Paul, go for it. And so it brought me a little peace that that woman didn't, she was part of the gimmick. Like it wasn't in spite of her. It doesn't make me feel any better about it because I don't think, I always say, nobody needs help with shame and judgment. Everybody has plenty of that. What they need help with is grace and understanding. Either understanding of, I think I've said this before, but when people go on a diet, right? A lot of them quit after 14 days, and it's not because they lack willpower. They're bad human beings. They're immoral. It's because they're depressed and they're not getting that dopamine rush that comes from sugar. They're not getting that satiation they're used to. And it takes time for your body and your palate to change. If you're used to eating ding dongs, raspberries aren't as sweet. You quit eating that stuff, and then eventually you're like, oh God, that tastes like metal. In fact, recently I do cast iron skillets. I take like new ones and I mill them down where they're perfectly shiny. Like a $16 one looks like a stainless steel thing, and it's just one of those things I enjoy doing. I love to cook. Because my dad overcooked everything, I learned how to cook everything so that I enjoyed food later in life without changing it. I can eat a steak and it's wonderfully made, right? Versus his, over well done blackened piece of expensive meat that we were required to somehow digest. Um, but it I think I lost my train of thought is what I think.
Well,
But
well, let me ask you, but while you're
yeah,
gaining it, Would your dad be proud of your cooking skills right now? Would he say, "Oh gosh, what are you doing? You're killing me"?
So what I'll tell you is, I about 20 years ago. This is how weird we are. Like this. This will give you a great example. So like 20 years ago, 2003 or so, uh, I got a big green egg, which is like a smoker barbecue. Now most people would just go, "I'm going to learn how to cook on my big green egg," but me and my buddy are like, "We got to do barbecue competitions." Like like it couldn't just be a normal like let's learn how to cook. It became like, oh, I'm going to redo cast iron skillets. I'm going to do barbecue. Like we go to the extreme, right? What I'll tell you is, Dad, when he was, when I kind of got good at it, which had been late 2006, seven, he would bring food over to me to have me cook it because he said it tasted better. And I remember making him a medium rare steak at that point. And he goes, "Oh, that tastes different." And so he would never do it for himself, but he
Right.
did allow me to do it.
Okay. Okay.
I
Okay.
was a way better cook than he was. Like he just thought he was a barbecue master, and he was the furthest thing from it. Now, the one thing he did well is he cooked, a charred hot dogs with the blackened part, and that's the only way to eat them. Personally, I believe. So but even hot dogs were overcooked.
Gotcha. 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 So, okay. So now we're actually reaching our time limit. So I
Have
wanted
that.
to.
That's my fault.
Oh no, 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 no. That's fine. I didn't want to, overstay my welcome. I know you had things actually lined up, so you gave us more than expected. So I appreciate that deeply.
That's because I only have one speed is to overdo it.
And listen, and we also one a fan also wrote. I don't know if you also answered that question before leave because I know you was answering, and and you're a good podcaster. That's the podcasting in you. You're multitasking. So he's asked the gym spa video and Piper. The WrestleMania promos were a riot. The WrestleMania's promo as
So
far
he
as
was talking in the two spots before that about he what was my take on those videos,
okay,
specifically that woman in the gym that still had her teeth.
okay,
And by the way, if you can step back from it and take away the social implications, that was funny. That I mean, it was like comedians can make that joke and or certain jokes, but I think we've become very conscious of and I'm very conscious. Words are powerful. Words are extremely powerful. And I've been fortunate to, um, though I get distracted, I can articulate a story fairly well, right?
mhm,
But I will tell you, that was a curse for a long time, and I used my words to hurt people, and I regret that, and so my life and even what I do today, like I don't curate my words because it's who I am now. Like this is part of my spirit, but
mhm,
I'm very careful to know that I can either build somebody up or tear them down, and I have to choose. So even my reaction to people in public or like that is something that I think my dad struggled with. Like he had that thing where he would react, and I certainly reflected that impulse. So there's power in words, and so when I look at the gym video and the salon video, they're funny from a distance. At the same time, I'm very aware that's not what I want to put out to the world. That's wrestling. It's fake. Wrestling has this weird thing with reality TV that it's like it's kind of reality TV. Like it's not real. It's kind of scripted, but there's some truth to it.
mhm. Um, uh, he mentioned one of the fans is asking you, your dad in an interview with Boston Wrestling said that him and Orton and Piper thought that Mr. T was going to be a cheap shot, was going to be a cheap shot, was going to cheap shot them, and they were ready to hurt him bad. He said that the button was ready to be pushed. What was your thoughts on that? Do you have any knowledge
Well,
on that?
yeah, I do. And what I would say is the ego and the path those men took to get to WrestleMania, right? Like they went through hell. They went through physical hell, and they built that off of their blood, sweat, and tears. And
Right.
so while I think Vince is a genius, because I'm looking at it from a business standpoint, that you made TV and reality intersect with wrestling. Like you brought validation to it from somebody that was very popular in the psyche of America, and it brought eyes to wrestling that would not have come otherwise. People forget Liberace came down, Muhammad Ali, the greatest entertainer likely of sports in sports, and how he did his interviews and promos that most of those men learned from. Like that brought a sense of realness to a psyche in America as they took a New York territory and made it into a worldwide federation and ultimately world wrestling entertainment. And when they say world, just know, I mentioned this story briefly in our interview, and I'm sitting at a table with a Nigerian man, and he recognizes my name. And I even just texted him the other day because I'm trying to get him some T-shirts. And you know, he's like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm like, "Man, it really is worldwide. Like, it's not just America. Like, it has translated. I get messages from Italy, Australia, Canada, um, Germany. It is a worldwide entertainment, and it transcends any other type of entertainment. Nobody cares about the Kardashians in Africa, but they care about wrestling.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So
Uh,
I respected Mr. T being a part of it because I saw the business side, even how they kept the title on Hogan. Because as you build out a brand, you gotta bring enough attention and keep that and maintain that. You can't change the belt out every 6 months. It took too long for the information to get across the country because of the way that TVs were back then. It wasn't till Saturday night, because people were like, "Oh, they would have made so much money." They didn't make any money off those house shows. It's $10 a ticket. Go look at the cards. They didn't make any money off that. So Mr. T being a part of it, they found it to be insulting that he was brought to a headline of a major event without having to have earned his stripes. And what I'll say is that's ego, because when they brought Mike Tyson in, or Donald Trump, or they brought in Pat McAfee, like, people see it as entertainment now. Back then, it was perceived differently. It did not become sports entertainment until after WrestleMania. Up until that point, it was wrestling, and that's how you spelled it: RASFLIN apostrophe.
yep. Well, in your dad's defense, and as far as the wrestlers in his era, I think their scheduling and the stuff that they had to go through to make it in the business versus right now. I mean, no offense to the wrestlers of this generation, but I think everything is at their disposal to actually make it these days. But back then, for people in your dad's era to actually make it, it was very, very tough. Very tough.
Here's the
Absolutely.
difference. Back then, they didn't have a choice. Like, my dad couldn't sell insurance. Like, he couldn't go work at, like, he wasn't, a professional football player for whatever reason. Like, those guys, like, they didn't choose wrestling. Wrestling chose them. Nowadays people see it as an opportunity. Like, these independent wrestling shows, like, those didn't exist back then. You had specific territories, kind of like mafias. And if you crossed that line in that territory, those wrestlers went over to your house. And back then we didn't have DNA, so we don't know where the bodies are, like, buried.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
It
Makes
was a
sense.
different, all of it was different. You didn't have to, the way these guys get into it now, I don't disrespect that. It's still hard. They still put their bodies on the line and have to learn the trade. But how those guys went into it back then, that was the only path. Like, I look at football players today that have NIL deals, and Cam Ward, I'm a huge Miami Hurricanes fan, and he sat out the second half of the football game. I respect him because he's going to the NFL. Like, I get it. That football game doesn't mean as much, and I'd rather him protect himself as an asset. That being said, football looked different back in the 80s. Like, they didn't get paid what they did, but those guys played because they loved it. Those guys wrestled because they loved it. And the reality is they were born for it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Definitely. Um, so listen. anything you want to tell the fans as far as to let them know what they're going to be in for when they see this movie so to speak?
Y-
Not a shoot
you
interview,
know,
but movie.
what I would say is come to it with your heart open. Come to it understanding it's my perspective on what life looked like from the lens of his son, and certainly from the lessons that I think he imparted on me on purpose. Like, never forget, as much as you love wrestling, my dad never wanted me to be a part of it. And if you don't understand that perspective, you won't understand many of the stories, because all of those things my dad did, not that I could have, right? Like, I'm not even putting myself in that category. I was not a nepo baby when it came to this identity in wrestling. But never forget, my dad didn't want me to be a part of it. And so the perspective I have is very unique in the sense that I'm telling you my dad's story from my lens and the impact it's had on my life, both in how he lived and then how he died. And so, you weren't there for the CTE. You weren't there looking at the journal that had my name and a phone number from 20 years ago, and there's question marks whether or not I'm his son. Like, there are elements of that world that, while they're entertainment to you, they were my life, right? And so I'm only sharing with you through this documentary about my father the life he wanted me to live, which, while you love wrestling and he loved wrestling, he still didn't want me to be a part of it. He still saw the impact it had on him, my brother, my mother, myself, and our family, both good and bad. I've seen the blessing in it. But this story of my dad, of all those things, you can go to other guys if you want to hear stories about the road. I'll give you what I got, right? Like, from my perspective. But the reality is, this is about life, and this is about how you live life, and how my dad lived his life, and the lessons he taught me from being on the inside of that business. And I have seen everything he told me, every element, both good and bad. I've seen it all come true. I've seen it with my own eyes, through the last few years. So just come to it from the perspective that I'm not here to glorify wrestling, or romanticize it. It is very much, what life was like for me, for him, at home, when everybody thinks that there's robe. Like, my dad didn't wear a robe around the house; it was in his bag, right? Like, that got checked at the door, and he became daddy. He became Pawpaw. He became, um, a mentor, not about wrestling, but about life. And his faith in Christ, paved the way for my own relationship with him. And, never doubt, and I said this, that I'll never forget it. It was one of the most impactful things. And I was a child. So some of these details, sometimes they're blurry, but this one's very significant, and I remember it. He spoke at New Hope Baptist Church at the Christmas lights, the Christmas tree, living Christmas tree, and he wasn't one. He got nervous going up there to talk about his faith, and he said, talking about, Jesus, like he's the real Mr. Wonderful. And so that's what my dad believed. So if you want to watch something about what my dad believed, then this is something you'll be entertained by. If you want to believe in the magic, that's for another story, and that's for another person.
Right, right. Oh man, greatly appreciated. Once again, what you're gonna be in for at chapter one, you're gonna hear the story of Travis Orndoff, the son of Mr. Paul Orndoff, and in chapter two, you'll hear the story from his son himself about Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndoff. Keep in mind, this will be premiering on January the 3rd. I repeat, January the 3rd on Don Devine on YouTube. So subscribe. Make sure you guys subscribe to Don Devine on YouTube so you could be notified as soon as it's up. So it will be premiering that day. Hope you guys enjoy. And Travis, man, once again, greatly appreciated, man. Thank you very
God
much.
bless you, my friend. It's always a pleasure, to get to share, my life with people. And it was a pleasure to spend time to get to know you, to go through this process, to allow it to manifest organically and in a way that I think reflects, not so much who we are as personalities, but very much who we are as people.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And speaking of organically, I don't have anybody to hit the stop button. So what you're gonna witness on my behalf is me organically stepping up and turning behind the camera and pressing the off button. So listen, hey guys, see you then, January 3rd. Subscribe to Don Davino on YouTube. Hope you guys enjoyed this. This was a trailer for the upcoming Movimentary. Take
Don't
care.
you dare turn your back on me. Don't you? I'm out of here first.
Oh.